Have you ever looked around the absolute most painful moment of your entire life and realized that the people who are supposed to love you the most are completely missing? My name is Sienna, and this is the story of how the day I buried the love of my life became the exact day my biological family decided to completely destroy me. My world completely shattered when my loving husband of 8 years passed away entirely without warning. His name was Leo, and he was a brilliant commercial architect who built massive, beautiful structures all over the Pacific Northwest. He was my absolute rock. A completely undetected heart condition took him from me in the blink of an eye. We had a beautiful partnership. Leo handled all the practical aspects of our life, like the bills and the paperwork and the complex taxes. I handled the warmth and the home and the emotional weight. When his heart suddenly stopped beating, I felt like I was completely paralyzed and profoundly lost in a massive ocean of heavy grief. The morning of his funeral was incredibly cold and dark. It rained with a thin and stubborn drizzle that clung to absolutely everything. We held the service in a quiet little church surrounded by the beautiful evergreen trees he always loved. About 40 people showed up to say their final goodbyes. There were his loyal architectural colleagues and our kind neighbors, and some close friends from college. I sat in the very front row wearing my black dress, and I felt completely numb. But throughout the entire heartbreaking service, I kept turning my head to look at the very back of the church. I had mentally reserved 3 specific seats on the left side. Those seats were meant for my father Richard, my mother Evelyn, and my younger sister Chloe. I kept waiting for the heavy wooden doors to open. I kept waiting for my mother to walk in and wrap her arms around me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. But those 3 seats remained completely empty for the entire morning. There were no wet coats draped over the wood and no familiar faces offering comfort. I stood by his grave in the pouring rain, and I actually felt guilty. I initially made excuses for them, assuming they were simply overwhelmed by the massive tragedy or trapped in terrible city traffic. I tried to convince my broken heart that my family loved me too much to face the harsh reality of my pain. But I was so incredibly blind. I had absolutely no idea that my parents and my sister had intentionally skipped the funeral of my husband. They were not sitting at home crying over my massive loss. They were actually busy sitting around their kitchen table carefully orchestrating a massive and calculated legal scheme against me right behind closed doors, and I was about to walk directly into their terrifying trap. The morning after the funeral, I woke up on my living room couch still wearing the exact same black dress from the cemetery. I felt completely hollow. I was still trying to figure out why my own parents and my sister Chloe had completely abandoned me on the hardest day of my life. I honestly thought they were just giving me space to grieve in peace. But while I was sitting there in the heavy silence, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered the call, and a man introduced himself as Mr. Sterling. He told me he was a high-end estate attorney located in downtown Seattle. He said he had been secretly retained by my husband Leo over a year ago. I was completely confused because I had absolutely no idea that Leo even had an estate attorney. Mr. Sterling asked me to come into his office immediately because there were extremely important documents that required my direct attention. I drove into the city completely numb. When I walked into his luxurious office, I felt incredibly out of place. Mr. Sterling sat across from me and opened a thick folder. That is exactly when he completely blindsided me with the absolute truth about the finances of my husband. I always knew Leo was a successful commercial architect, but I thought we were just living a comfortable and normal life. I had absolutely no idea what he was quietly doing behind the scenes. Mr. Sterling slid 3 different property summaries across the polished wooden desk. He explained that over the last 8 years, Leo had quietly built a massive real estate portfolio worth nearly $4 million. He owned 3 luxury rental properties right in the heart of Seattle and a breathtakingly beautiful beachfront home down on the Oregon coast. I read the massive numbers on the paperwork 2 or 3 times just trying to comprehend it. Mr. Sterling looked directly at me and told me that every single property was entirely debt-free. There were no mortgages and no hidden loans. Leo had left 100% of these massive assets entirely to me. Have you ever received news that completely shifts your entire reality in a matter of seconds? I sat in that leather chair with my mouth completely open. I realized that my brilliant husband was actively protecting my future, even from beyond the grave. But the meeting did not end with just happy tears. Before I left the office, the demeanor of Mr. Sterling completely changed. The room felt incredibly heavy. He reached into his pocket and handed me his personal business card. He looked me dead in the eyes and delivered a chilling warning that I will never forget. He explicitly told me that $4 million can make people do terrible things. He warned me that if anyone, and he specifically emphasized family members, tried to pressure me about these new assets, I needed to be extremely careful. He instructed me to call him immediately before signing a single piece of paper. At that exact moment, I thought he was just being overly cautious. I thanked him and walked out into the city. I had absolutely no idea that his terrifying warning was about to become my absolute nightmare that very same night. Have you ever reached out for a lifeline only to realize it was actually a dangerous trap waiting to drown you? That is exactly what happened to me on the very same evening I found out about the massive inheritance. After I left the downtown office of Mr. Sterling, my entire mind was spinning in a million different directions. I was just a grieving widow who suddenly owned $4 million in debt-free real estate. But I did not want to think about money or massive properties. I just desperately needed the warm and comforting embrace of my mother. I wanted to sit at the kitchen table where I grew up and hear her tell me that everything was going to be okay. So I drove directly to the house of my parents that evening, still wearing my black morning coat. I parked my car quietly in the driveway, and I walked up the front steps. The yellow porch light was on. The outer screen door was latched, but the heavy wooden inner door was slightly cracked open, just like my mother always left it when the house got too warm. I reached out my hand to pull the handle. But before I could even knock, I clearly heard my father say my name. I froze completely still in the dark shadows of the porch. I stood there and listened as the voice of my father proudly discussed the exact details of the $4 million estate. My sister Chloe chimed in, asking how they were going to get their hands on the money. Right there on the porch, I realized my biological family was actively plotting a massive criminal scheme to steal absolutely everything my husband Leo had built. My father laid out a deeply terrifying and calculated plan. He explicitly told them he had already spoken to a corrupt doctor who was willing to sign a fake medical certificate. They discussed using this doctor to officially declare me mentally unfit due to severe psychological trauma from my grief. They were going to file for emergency guardianship so Chloe could legally seize complete control of my entire estate and my life. My chest felt like someone had poured heavy concrete into it. But the ultimate betrayal, the absolute knife to my broken heart, came from my own mother. Her voice floated through the screen door, sounding incredibly cold and calm. She explicitly stated that Leo dying was the absolute best thing that had ever happened to their family because his massive wealth finally gave them a way out. I want you to really sit with that horrible sentence for a moment. The man I loved was barely in the ground, and my own mother was celebrating his sudden death like she had just won the lottery. My knees almost buckled under the massive weight of her cruel words, but I forced myself to stay completely upright. Trembling but thinking incredibly clearly, I reached into my deep coat pocket. I pulled out my smartphone, opened the voice memo application, and I pressed the red record button. I held my phone near the crack in the door, and I quietly recorded their entire sickening conversation. I captured every single terrifying detail of their massive conspiracy. After a few minutes, I stopped the recording, turned around, and quietly walked back down the steps. I got into my car and I drove away into the dark night without shedding a single tear. I did not know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew I had the absolute, undeniable proof to completely destroy their terrible plan. Have you ever been completely terrified but also more awake than you have ever been in your entire life? That is exactly how I felt as I drove away from the house of my parents that night. I did not burst through their front door, and I did not scream at them or demand answers. I simply drove 30 minutes in complete and utter silence. I walked into the apartment I used to share with Leo, and I sat down at our kitchen table. The coffee mug of my husband was still sitting in the drying rack. I looked at it and realized I had to fight for everything he left me. I picked up my smartphone and I immediately called my childhood best friend Maya. Maya is a senior legal consultant for a massive corporate law firm in the city. She picked up the phone late at night and she just listened as I poured out the entire horrifying story. I played the audio recording of my family plotting to steal my $4 million inheritance. Most people would gasp or cry, but Maya is brilliant and sharp. She listened to the recording and her voice turned into pure steel. She explicitly told me that this was not just a toxic family disagreement. What my father and mother were planning was a highly calculated felony fraud. Maya instructed me to do the absolute hardest thing imaginable. She told me to act completely normal around my parents. I had to smile and pretend I knew absolutely nothing while we prepared a massive legal counterattack behind their backs. I had to let them think their wicked plan was working flawlessly. The very next morning, Maya helped me book an urgent and completely independent psychiatric evaluation. We did not use a random family doctor like my father planned to do. Maya sent me to one of the most respected mental health professionals in the entire city. I walked into her quiet office and I sat down for a rigorous 90-minute session. The doctor asked me about my husband and my daily routines and my sleep schedule. She asked me about my childhood and my parents. I sat there, and I told her the absolute truth about every single thing. At the end of the 90 minutes, the doctor looked at me across her desk and told me that grieving the loss of a husband is a completely normal human experience. It is absolutely not a psychological disability. She wrote out a certified and ironclad medical report. She stamped it and handed the original document directly to me. That single piece of paper proved legally and medically that I was of perfectly sound mind. It confirmed I was fully capable of managing my own massive finances. I walked out of that clinic holding the ultimate shield. My family thought they could easily declare me insane, but I was already 10 steps ahead of them. Have you ever tried to figure out exactly why someone you love would do something completely unforgivable to you? I was sitting in my apartment holding that certified medical report, feeling like I had just put on a massive suit of armor. I finally proved that my mind was perfectly sound, but there was still one massive missing piece to this entire nightmare. I needed to understand exactly why my biological parents and my sister Chloe were willing to commit such a massive felony against me. That very same Friday night, my best friend Maya came over to my apartment with her laptop and a yellow legal pad covered in detailed notes. While I was out securing my medical defense, Maya had been aggressively digging deep into public financial records. Maya sat down at the kitchen table that used to belong to my husband Leo, and she turned her laptop screen directly toward me. She explicitly told me that she pulled absolutely everything she could find, and the truth was far worse than we ever thought. Maya calmly walked me through the absolute pathetic reality of my toxic family. She pointed to the screen and showed me that my father Richard and my mother Evelyn were completely drowning in severe debt. They had a massive outstanding balance on a second mortgage and a massive federal tax lien. They were 5 months behind on their house payments, and the bank had already sent them a notice of default. But the financial disaster did not stop with my parents. Maya flipped the page on her legal pad and showed me the records for my younger sister Chloe. Chloe had racked up nearly $200,000 in defaulted credit cards. She was facing multiple civil lawsuits from angry creditors, and she even had an eviction filing against her. When Maya added all the massive numbers together, the reality hit me like a physical blow. My biological family was facing nearly $600,000 in combined severe debt. They were completely bankrupt and legally cornered in every single direction. Maya looked at me across the table and told me the absolute undeniable truth. She said they were not doing this terrible thing because they actually believed I was mentally unstable or unable to manage my own money. They were doing this simply because they were incredibly desperate. I sat there staring at the kitchen table where my brilliant husband Leo used to quietly build his massive real estate empire. He never told me about the massive debt my family was hiding, but he absolutely made sure every single asset was completely in my name only. I realized with horrifying clarity that my family was drowning, and my $4 million inheritance was their absolute only financial lifeboat. They were perfectly willing to completely destroy my entire life and strip away all my legal rights just to save themselves. Have you ever realized that the people you trusted most were just looking at you and seeing a giant wallet instead of a human being? Tell me your thoughts down in the comments, because coming to that realization almost completely broke my heart. Have you ever realized that the systems built to protect us can easily be weaponized by the exact people we are supposed to trust? While my best friend Maya and I were uncovering the massive mountain of debt my family was hiding, my father, Richard, was already putting his dark plan into motion. He did exactly what I heard him say on that dark porch. My father leveraged a personal connection with a corrupt local physician named Dr. Thorne. I want you to really think about how terrifying this next part is. Dr. Thorne was a licensed medical professional who took an oath to do no harm. But without ever scheduling a single appointment with me, without ever speaking to me on the phone, and without ever laying his eyes on my face, Dr. Thorne illegally signed a certified medical document. My legal team eventually got a copy of that exact paperwork, and reading it made my blood run completely cold. The forged medical document officially declared that I was suffering from severe grief-induced psychosis. Dr. Thorne wrote that I had a marked and complete inability to make basic, personal, or financial decisions. But the absolute most horrifying part of the entire document was the line that asked for the date of the patient examination. That specific line was left completely blank because an examination absolutely never happened. There was only a fake signature and a corrupt favor between two desperate men. My father literally bought a fake medical diagnosis just to erase my entire legal existence. Armed with this completely fabricated medical certificate, my father did not waste a single second. He took that fake piece of paper and aggressively filed an emergency petition with the local probate court. He formally requested that a judge immediately strip me of all my fundamental legal rights. He wanted the court to legally declare me an incapacitated adult. And of course, the final piece of his massive puzzle was sitting right there at the bottom of the petition. My father formally requested the judge to instantly appoint my completely bankrupt sister Chloe as the permanent legal guardian over my massive $4 million estate. Can you even begin to imagine the absolute sheer panic of knowing your own father is actively petitioning a court of law to take away your human rights? He wanted to turn me into a legal ghost in my own life. If the judge signed that emergency order, Chloe would have immediate and total access to every single bank account and property my brilliant husband Leo had built for me. She would have used my entire inheritance to pay off her massive credit card debt and save the foreclosed house of my parents. I was standing on a terrifying legal cliff and the clock was ticking down to 0. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to fight a legal battle against your own blood, because the emotional toll is absolutely devastating. Have you ever noticed that the absolute most dangerous traps are usually disguised as an act of pure love? While we were waiting for the court to process that terrifying emergency paperwork, my family decided they could not wait any longer. They launched a highly coordinated and massive double attack against me. Before a judge had even looked at the fake medical certificate, my sister Chloe was already making her incredibly greedy move. The property management company that handled the massive apartment buildings called me in an absolute panic. The woman on the phone told me that someone identifying herself as my official legal guardian had just contacted them. Chloe had arrogantly provided the exact case number from the probate court. She explicitly demanded that all of the massive rental income be redirected immediately into a brand new bank account that she completely controlled. She was actively impersonating a court-appointed guardian in a desperate attempt to steal my money. My lawyer had to immediately send a legal cease and desist letter to stop her from committing massive identity fraud. But Chloe making illegal phone calls was only the very first half of their sick strategy. The very next afternoon, my father Richard suddenly showed up at my apartment completely unannounced. He walked right through my front door, holding 2 warm coffees and a paper bag of fresh pastries from the local bakery. He was perfectly playing the role of a deeply concerned and loving father who just wanted to check on his grieving daughter. He sat down at the exact same kitchen table where my brilliant husband Leo used to carefully build his real estate empire. After about 10 minutes of entirely fake small talk, my father casually reached right into his jacket. He pulled out a thin stack of legal documents and slid them directly across the table along with a blue pen. He kept his voice incredibly soft and told me it was just a simple temporary paper. He claimed it would just allow him to help me pay my complicated bills and handle the real estate taxes while I was grieving the loss of my husband. But I had already been strictly warned by my legal team. I looked at my father and calmly told him that Leo always taught me to carefully read every single document before signing anything, so I needed a few days to look it over. The jaw of my father immediately tightened, and he became visibly angry, but he knew he could not argue with the advice of a dead man. He eventually left the papers right there on the table and walked out the door. As soon as he was gone, I quickly photographed every single page and sent them directly to my lawyer. The terrifying response came back almost immediately. My lawyer explicitly warned me that the document was absolutely not temporary. It was a blanket general power of attorney with 0 restrictions whatsoever. Furthermore, it was secretly drafted by a former business partner of my father. If I had picked up that blue pen and signed my name, my father would have had the absolute legal authority to sell every single one of my massive properties by the very next morning. My own father was sitting in my kitchen, smiling at me while handing me the exact pen to sign my entire life away. Have you ever had to look directly into the eyes of a parent and realize they are actively trying to destroy you? Tell me your story in the comments below, because navigating that level of pure betrayal is the absolute hardest thing I have ever had to do. Have you ever walked directly into the exact room where your enemies are sitting just so you can personally watch their entire world collapse? After surviving the coordinated attack from my father and my sister, I knew it was finally time to end this massive nightmare. Working incredibly closely with the financial fraud detective named Carter, my legal team and I planned the ultimate confrontation. Early that Sunday morning, I drove to the house of my parents. I did not wear my black mourning clothes this time because I was absolutely done crying. I walked right through their front door and stepped into the living room. My mother Evelyn was standing near the kitchen, and my sister Chloe was sitting on the sofa looking at her phone. My father Richard immediately sat down across from me and squared his shoulders, trying to play the dominant head of the family. He confidently started giving me a completely fake speech about how they just wanted to protect my massive estate because I was too emotionally fragile to handle it. I let him talk for a few minutes. Then I looked directly into his eyes and calmly asked him exactly when he had last spoken to his good friend Dr. Thorne. The face of my father completely froze mid-sentence, but he quickly recovered and confidently lied right to my face. He claimed the doctor had thoroughly reviewed my complex psychological case and was just deeply concerned about my health. Exactly at that very moment, the front doorbell rang. My father looked confused, but he got up and opened the heavy wooden door. Detective Carter walked straight into the living room. He was accompanied by my brilliant estate lawyer, Mr. Sterling, and my fiercely loyal best friend, Maya. The entire room instantly fell into a heavy and suffocating silence. Detective Carter did not waste a single second. He coldly informed my father that the fake medical certificate he submitted to the probate court had turned this supposed family matter into a massive criminal investigation. Carter looked directly at my trembling parents and announced that Dr. Thorne had already been taken into police custody at dawn. Facing the absolute loss of his medical license and severe prison time, the corrupt doctor had completely confessed to everything. Carter explicitly detailed the massive confession right there in the living room. Dr. Thorne admitted that Richard had actively bribed him to forge the medical documents without ever conducting a single patient examination. But the confession did not stop with my father. The detective also revealed that my mother Evelyn had specifically provided the fake diagnostic language to the doctor, and that my sister Chloe was fully aware and actively participated in the entire massive conspiracy. In a matter of seconds, the fake loving masks of my biological family were completely ripped away. They were no longer a family trying to help a grieving widow. They were officially exposed as desperate criminals who tried to steal $4 million. Have you ever seen someone realize that their massive web of lies has finally trapped them instead of their victim? Let me know in the comments, because watching the color completely drain from the faces of my toxic family was a moment I will absolutely never forget. Have you ever watched the people who raised you completely turn into strangers right before your very eyes? The moment Detective Carter revealed the massive confession from Dr. Thorne, the entire illusion of my happy family violently shattered into a million pieces. My father, Richard, tried to play dumb, but my sister Chloe immediately shot to her feet in absolute panic. She started screaming and pointing her finger directly at our father, claiming the fake doctor was entirely his idea and she had absolutely nothing to do with it. But my father violently spun around and screamed right back at her. He yelled that Chloe was the one who arrogantly called the property manager, pretending to be my legal guardian before they even had the forged court papers. It took less than 10 seconds for my biological family to completely turn on each other. They were viciously placing the blame on one another, right in front of the police and my legal team. I sat there watching them tear each other apart, and I finally felt nothing but pure clarity. I stood up slowly, and the entire room went completely still. Everyone stopped screaming and looked directly at me. I did not yell, and I did not cry. I spoke incredibly quietly because I wanted every single word to land like a heavy stone. I looked directly into the eyes of my mother Evelyn. I told her that on the exact night of the funeral of my husband, I stood outside her front door and I listened. Then I delivered the final and absolute crushing blow. I repeated the exact cruel words she had said on that dark porch weeks earlier. I looked at her and calmly said, "Leo dying is the absolute best thing that has ever happened to this family." The face of my mother completely crumpled in absolute horror and shame. I told her I recorded every single word, and I had known about their massive betrayal from the very beginning. The entire room fell into a suffocating and heavy silence. Nobody moved and nobody even dared to breathe. Detective Carter immediately signaled to the uniformed officers waiting outside. Right there in the living room, they officially arrested all three of them. My father was handcuffed first, facing severe felony charges for massive fraud upon the court and medical forgery. My mother was next arrested for massive conspiracy to misappropriate my assets. Finally, they handcuffed my sister Chloe for severe identity fraud and attempted theft. They were dragged out of their own home in broad daylight, while all the neighbors stood on their lawns watching the massive spectacle. Have you ever had to watch your own family get taken away in police cars because of their own toxic greed? Let me know how you found the strength to walk away, because choosing to finally stand up for myself was the absolute hardest but best decision of my entire life. Have you ever realized that the ultimate revenge is not actually destroying your enemies but simply walking away and building a beautiful life completely without them? The legal fallout for my toxic family was absolutely devastating and incredibly swift. My father Richard was officially sentenced to federal prison for his massive fraud upon the court. My mother Evelyn received heavy probation and hundreds of hours of community service. My sister Chloe was jailed for severe identity theft and attempted theft by deception. Because they were all locked away or entirely buried in massive legal fees, they ultimately suffered the complete loss of their foreclosed family home. They tried to steal my massive estate just to save themselves, but their toxic greed left them with absolutely nothing in the end. For me, the aftermath of those arrests was not just about winning a legal battle. It was the very beginning of a journey of profound self-discovery. I permanently cut off all contact with my toxic relatives. People sometimes ask me if I have forgiven them, but I have learned that setting ironclad boundaries is absolutely not an act of cruelty. It is a deeply necessary form of self-preservation. Boundaries are not about feelings, they are about pure safety. I built a massive wall where there used to be a door, and I am absolutely never looking for the blueprints to undo it. I packed up my old life and I moved full-time into the beautiful beachfront home Leo had left me on the Oregon coast. I wake up every single morning and I drink my coffee on my wraparound porch listening to the ocean waves. But I did not just hide away from the world. I enrolled in extensive financial management courses at a local college to take complete and total control of my wealthy estate. I learned how to read complex balance sheets and manage property taxes. For the first time in my entire adult life, I knew exactly where my money was and what it was doing. While I was unpacking my things, I found a hidden letter from Leo tucked inside a small fireproof box. His handwriting was small and careful. He wrote that I was always stronger than I thought and that I just never had the permission to believe it. He was absolutely right. But I realize now that I do not need permission anymore. Not from him, and certainly not from my toxic family. If you are listening to this and someone in your life is actively trying to make you feel completely invisible or incapable, I really need you to hear my voice right now. Do not let them control your reality. The absolute strongest revenge is simply building a brilliant and independent life where those who tried to destroy you absolutely no longer exist. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this painful but beautiful journey. If my story reached your heart today, please hit that like and subscribe button to support the channel. Please share this video with anyone who needs a powerful reminder of their own absolute worth. Stay strong, and always fight for your undeniable truth.